What if every single sip is like this?
I think it sounds like an auditory pleasure for the
It
audience.
adds, yeah. There are probably people who get up. There's someone is furiously masturbating right now while they listen to this.
So you wanted that for a cold opening.
Exactly. I know what I'm doing.
All right, Josh. So what I would just want to know is how a fella from Australia made it big in New York and now pretty much lives on his own terms, writing, producing, really whatever you want. Polish father, Holocaust survivor, Australian mother. You studied media and law at university.
Media and communications.
Foreshadowing by winning the best debater at UTS at some stage there. And then this is sort of where the timeline starts now. In 2000, you're 23 years old, and you're the voice of Olly the Kookaburra at the 2000 Olympics.
Yes. I was a voiceover actor, a voice artist in my teens. When I was in my early teens, my dad, who was a successful actor in Australia, got a call from his voiceover agent, and they said, do you know any young voices? And he asked if my brother and I would be interested in doing voices.
Oh, fantastic.
And so throughout my teens, back in the halcyon days when before you could just hop online and get a random person in a random country to do a voiceover for you for $50, when it was unionized, you'd get $350 or something, which in today's money is probably $800 or something.
And thousands of dollars for a kid.
No, right, and for a kid, I mean, it felt like it was $1 million a week every time I would do that, and I became one of the most heard voices. And partly as a result, and partly because I was a precocious show-off, I got good at doing character voices as well. And so I didn't just do the, "Hey, Mum, get us this magazine" or something like that. It would also be funny, silly voices. And one of those. It's actually an instructive anecdote how I got the voice of the Olympic mascot. I should say I was never in a suit. Like, I wasn't that person. They had the voices. They'd put dancers in the suits, and they put voice people in the booth.
But you are the single voice of this
character.
character.
I was the only voice of this character. Who there was Sid, Millie, and Olly, and Olly was the Kookaburra. And it was pretty late at night by this stage. I still lived with my parents. I was 20, maybe 20 when they were casting this. I think. No, I must have been
you're
younger.
23 in the year 2000.
I turned 23 at the end of the year 2000, so they would have been casting this in the mid-90s. Mm-hmm. So I would have been
of course,
right?
Yeah.
So it's not. So I would have been in my mid-teens. Mm-hmm. So I would have been maybe 15 or something, 16, and it was late at night, and I was doing either university work or high school work, and I was exhausted, and I remember it was very hot in the attic, and I was just recording a demo for what I thought that the Kookaburra mascot of the Sydney Olympic Games should sound like. And I was inventing this kind of like laugh where he would always be like, "It's amazing," that kind of thing. And I just thought, this is exhausting. I want to go to bed. I'm over it. And I texted my agent and said, "This is, frustrating me. Should I just submit something that's not that great?
Okay.
Or should I
shoot for the hills?
Really, shoot for the stars? Or should I not submit at all?" And she said, "Well, I would say that if you're going to do something, then you might as well do it well." And so I bothered to do it well, and I got the job. And they ended up not being a major part of the Olympics because the ceremony went in a slightly different direction. But it was we were huge in Japan.
Anything that happened there, yeah.
We were huge in Japan. There was an album. We recorded Sid, Millie, and Olly sing your favorite Olympic tunes. Now, you may not even know that you have favorite Olympic tunes, but apparently you do, or the Japanese did.
This is obviously going to be a reoccurring theme as we go through a timeline of your life, but the type of serendipity that goes from your dad happens to know a guy, puts you up for it, you end up being the voice of Olly the Kookaburra. Who knows whether that also success drew you into the satirization period, which drew you into broadcasting and so forth.
I mean, we can probably save a lot of time across the course of this conversation by noting up front a phenomenon, which is that when people... I remember one of my mentors was a guy named Simon Townsend, who recently passed away, who was the most popular kids television presenter in the 80s and 90s in Australia. He had a show called Simon Townsend's Wonder World, and it was like must-see viewing. He won a swag of Logies, which are like the highest Australian television award. And I remember asking him if he could put me in touch when I was in my teens with producers and things like that to ask their advice about how you break into. I basically wanted to be a television host, right? I idolized Letterman and later Jon Stewart and Conan O'Brien and, plus some more serious people. I did work experience in year 10 on the Ray Martin show, which was like a daytime talk show. And I remember emailing one successful television producer for his advice. And he sent back a very generous but very depressing, lengthy email saying, I get this question a lot. And what you're basically saying is, how do I become successful in television? Which is like asking how long is a piece of string. It's an impossible question to answer. There are as many ways as there are people in the world. If there was an easy answer to this, then everyone would just do that thing, and then it wouldn't be as chaotic and unpredictable an industry as it is. And I think the guiding sort of principle that has always worked for me is a combination of serendipity, which you were just saying, and a big dose of luck, and a big dose of, I don't want to say knowing people, because I think people can put too much emphasis on knowing people, because knowing people gets you nowhere if you're no good.
You have to have something to show them.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And it isn't really even about who you know. It's more about who respects what you're doing.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. Your reputation.
Your reputation. Yes, that's right. And the only thing that has ever worked for me, or I think for anybody, is throwing a lot of shit at the wall and making it as good as you can, and making the output as both maximum quantity and maximum quality in as many unusual ways as you can think of doing. And eventually, it's a numbers game.
And underneath it as well is a pretty healthy dose of ambition. Although you might not outwardly show it all the time.
Yes.
You do have a pretty good sense for what you want, and maybe a rather vague path of how to get there.
One of my regrets about my own character is that I wish I had a clearer idea of what I want. I think I took a very circuitous and much longer track to success than I needed to, or than some of my peers did, who were more, I was banging around at the same time as colleagues of mine who were a little bit older, like Charlie Pickering. The Chaser guys were about a half generation older than me. They were just finishing their law degrees when I started uni. Ed Cavalier was one of my close mates, and they all, I think, had a very clear, and like Will Anderson was also a sort of a mentor figure. These were people who knew exactly what they wanted, and then they took the most direct route to get it. They just did stand up, or they did, and they kept performing. I did not feel like stand up was right for me, and I didn't feel like acting was right for me, but I didn't quite feel like journalism was right for me. And if you looked at my job now, like there has never been a classifieds ad in a job, posting for what I do.
Podcast host.
Yeah, especially not podcast host of a part funny, part intellectual, part provocative,
occasionally very serious and sincere.
Occasionally serious and sincere, show. And certainly before podcasts existed, there was not that remit for radio shows and television shows. So I was essentially trying to construct, in much the same way that Jon Stewart did on The Daily Show, I was trying to find a way to be able to construct something on the fly that suited my personality. But when you're a young person, you don't really know what your personality or your character is, because you're trying on a lot of faces, you're trying on a lot of masks, you're trying on a lot of different costumes, metaphorically. So ambition, yes, but not clear-headed focus.
This does immediately divert from the prepared timeline. But take it back a year ago after the debacle with the ABC. You released a podcast called On Resilience, and you're sharing this anecdote about how when you were between LA and New York before the Huffpost live gig, you sort of just took this chance and went all in. My gut wants to be in New York. Serendipity and hard work ended up with the Huffpost gig. But I felt like after the ABC thing, that same sentiment must have been running through your veins. Now I really have to go all in on uncomfortable conversations, the substack, the podcast, everything around it. And there's a tremendous insecurity in that. because what if it doesn't actually go according to plan?
Yes.
What the fuck have I been doing all this time to get to this place?
Yep.
Was that the feeling?
Definitely. It's interesting. I recently had Bob Carr on my show. I don't know whether or not that will have been released by the time people hear this or see it, but he was the Premier of New South Wales and the Foreign Minister of Australia. And I was asking when in his life he felt most alive. And I sort of expected him to maybe say his childhood or maybe his university years, maybe as a debater or something like that. People usually go for some time before the age of maybe 25 when they're talking about their most aliveness, right?
When the weight of life starts bearing down on you.
Well, that's right. And when you sort of become a bit more serious and a bit more responsible. He said the mid-90s, when he was in his late 40s, and he was running to become the Premier. He was the opposition leader of New South Wales. So he was in his mid-40s when he was already essentially an unknown figure, and there was one election in which he was either going to win it or lose it, and if he lost it, he would essentially just be a generic person, and people didn't think he was going to win it. There was a very popular Premier, John Fahey at the time, from the opposition, from the Liberal Party. He was highly intellectual. He didn't exude charisma. He wasn't particularly handsome, and he just knew that his life was at a fork in the road. And I think we all get some of those. And you're right that moment where I had to decide whether or not I was going to continue pushing on and striving to succeed in New York City was one of them. And certainly at the end of the ABC, that was an enormous rupture because there had been a sort of a semi-public succession plan in which I was going to become like one of the faces of the broadcaster, and
Can
then
only
was
imagine
given
how devastating that would have been.
Yeah, and in hindsight, it's ridiculous because I'm so relieved, like it was the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Right.
I mean,
paradoxically,
you never know how life is just going to hand you what look like lemons that turn out to be gold. It's insane that I was so blinkered and so stuck in the ways of what I thought broadcasting was when I was 15.
It's funny though, because I sense you do have this real sincere admiration and almost longing for traditional broadcasting.
Yes, absolutely.
Despite the fact you're entirely new independent media, all of at least the friends that we see in public in America are all this branch of media.
Yeah.
You know, even when you're going through the succession plan at ABC, and you can see that media attitudes are changing, behavior is changing. Why is it that you're still clinging to this hope that maybe I could be the face of ABC?
Well, I think there was something special about the era from, I guess, the 50s to the 2010s.
So it was a sentimentality.
It's not just me being sentimental. It's me putting my finger on something that I think actually was a good, although it was not without its downsides as well, which was we had common cultural touchstones. You know, you would all know what was on Seinfeld the night before. You would all know what Johnny Carson or Dave Letterman had done. You would all get your news from Walter Cronkite or Brian Henderson if you're in New South Wales. And I do think we've lost something now that we're all just streaming different echo chambers and
there are no common cultural touch points there.
Yeah.
And then when you do discover it with someone, it's kind of special.
Yes,
that's right. You listen to that podcast too.
Yes. I mean, there are a few things, you know, occasionally you'll get, but it's usually drama or something. It's usually
Maps.
Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Maps. Hilarious. A show I've never seen, believe it or not. But it might be White Lotus or, you know, Breaking Bad or something like that, where the intelligentsia are all on the same page of it. It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who used to be a producer at the ABC, and she worked with me in New York City as well. And she was saying, I was saying, you know, I just sort of, I don't know, this was while I was, I guess, still grieving the rupture of my falling out with the ABC, and trying to, it's not that I should clarify, the trauma is a bit like the trauma of a breakup, of a romantic breakup, in that a lot of it has to do with just rewiring your brain into accepting a different future than the one that you'd anticipated.
And made so much plans for.
Yeah. And so it's a bit like grief as well, where it's not necessarily, it's not that it's not that, I don't know, losing a parent or a grandparent is inherently terrible. Like, it's just the way of the world. These things do happen. It was inevitable at some stage, and losing jobs is like that as well. But it's the fact that you had this whole set of expectations about what the future of your life was going to look like, and that you now have to reconfigure those. And so I was sort of whining to this friend of mine about how, it's just shocking that I'm, I don't know, not going to be the drive presenter on ABC Radio Sydney or the breakfast presenter, imminently at least. And she said, but do you really want to be the drive presenter on ABC Radio Sydney in 2026? She said, what you want is to be Richard Glover in 1998, which is when you came of age, when ABC Radio Sydney, or 702 as it was called at the time, was one of those cultural touchstones, when everybody knew what Glover... The whole city tuned in. And those days are over. That doesn't happen anymore. That ship has sailed. So my embrace of new media and of Podcasterstan is entirely a function of my recognition of the reality of the world and the constraints that now exist in the legacy media that I don't love. It's not because I think that the legacy media didn't have a lot to contribute when it was on top.
We're also now in the throes of the recasting of all the business models around media consumption, and clearly, so from a certain demographic down, all the eyeballs point in one direction. There is no reason why, should 5-10 years, as all of this sort of settles and becomes clear, you can't turn around and be the host of a nightly TV talk show that's streamed on YouTube.
Yes.
That's your style, your curation, exactly what you want. And very ambitiously, it could become a touchstone for a culture. But at least for your audience, it will become a touchstone. And I see no future why that wouldn't play out.
From your lips to God's ears.
Right, precisely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, yes, I mean, if things are good, then people will watch them, basically. But they just won't watch them in the same numbers as they did when there were only 3 things to watch.
Right, totally. And that's beside the point. I won't go there. So you landed on Bob Carr when I asked you about this moment of reflection in your life, how he was in his late 40s. And, this is when he felt most alive. It sounds a little bit like yourself, having left ABC in a similar age bracket. Forgive me, I know it's a bit earlier, but nonetheless. Do you feel most alive now with what you're doing? That departure from ABC and that sort of risk really made you feel alive?
I mean, professionally, I feel like I'm in a great place, and personally, yes. But I think alive, I'm not sure I would go that far with Bob.
Yeah. It's also hard to define. What does that mean?
That's true. I mean, I'm absolutely blessed in the sense that, like, how many people who start podcasts want to end up in a situation where they make a good middle-class living?
Every one of them.
And they only have, you sit down twice a week and do a show, and then, you get to pay off a mortgage. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It has not been quick, and it has not been easy, and it has not been without its moments of like staring into the dark abyss of failure. But the fact that I'm hardwired in such a way to have kept on keeping on is no more my doing than any other thing that I have the good fortune to have
what do you mean by
enjoyed.
That?
I just mean, people sometimes think about luck in life as being the luck of either where you were born or the identity groups that you were born into or the things that happened to you. But I'm just taking it one step further and saying I'm also lucky to have the kind of character that has been as resilient as I am. Right? I didn't choose to be hardwired in such a way that I would not give in during those moments of failure. And so I'm grateful for all of it. Aliveness, I mean, I do think I am a bit wistful at the moment, as one frequently is, as your life sort of unspools into your 40s and have like kids and that sort of thing, about the heedlessness of youth. I remember another friend saying to me, do I miss living in New York City, where I spent most of my adult life in New York City, and only moved back to Australia when I had kids 7 years ago. And I said, absolutely, I miss it. I spent my 20s and most of my 30s there. And she said, "What do you miss about it?" And I said, "Well, I miss getting a text message from a friend at 10 p.m. and being able to go out to one of 40, 50 or 60 different bars or, restaurants and spending the night there and moving on to wherever else we wanted to and getting home at 4 a.m. and not worrying about it." And she said, this was when my kids were about 2 years old in Sydney. She said, "You don't miss New York. You miss not being a father."
Perceptive kid.
Which is true, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, there's a different phase in your life. And so I am wistful about that era of life when all of the colors were turned up 10%, brighter than they are as you get older. There's a certain contentedness to getting older, but there's a big pride. It comes at a heavy price, which is what is the price? The price is a lack of vibrancy, vitality, energy, newness,
the
freshness.
mundanity of routine in life.
Yeah. It's very. I have to start actively, proactively struggling against complacency, right? And struggling to find the beauty and the joy and the unusualness and the unexpectedness in the world, which is ridiculous because the world is so incredible that if you just try to pay attention to it, you can be endlessly surprised. But our brains, our monkey brains, are just very good at.
With your occupation and where you are, you can really open up the aperture to whatever interest actually you do want.
Yes.
For instance, we were talking about Sam Rovagine before we started. You want to get a Chinese sinologist on, fly over to Shanghai, have a cracking interview. Your audience trust you and your curation. They'll still listen to it.
Yes.
Yes. I can imagine, at least this is something I'm projecting here, but within your worldview is my work and my situation actually allows me to go and do these things now.
Yeah, well,
which would introduce so much of that color.
Yeah, I mean, personal life, having primary school age kids isn't necessarily conducive to traveling a lot. So I am somewhat hemmed in, but you're absolutely right. That within the next decade, I can certainly see a scenario in which I become more of a roving wanderer and do more segments wherever. I mean, that would be the life of a PJ O'Rourke or someone like that who just roves around the world.
I don't know about him.
American humorist who would post dispatches from like the fall of the Berlin Wall or something, but he'd write very smart alecky, funny. And you go to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and like write these hilarious kind of essays for Esquire or Vanity Fair or something. That's pretty cool.
Nice. Back to the timeline. We've already deviated a little bit too far, and I'm also conscious of the time. But so we went from the Kookaburra's gig. We haven't gone past that yet. So, for instance, by the time you're 26, 2003, you've sufficiently satirized Howard into a radio gig, which then serendipitously led to a lot of other gigs. And then you do a science show called Brink, but I've kind of got a blank space between 2003 and 2012 when you get the Huffpost gig. So fill me in. What was your jobs up until then?
So I was in Sydney and at the beginning of that, and I was doing... So I started out as a radio producer, actually. I started out producing for Clive Robertson, Howard Sattler, and then Alan Jones. It was while I was working for Alan that the Chaser Boys had a comedy segment on the Drive show on 2UE, which was hosted by Mike Carlton. And I just sort of said to them, because I knew them through debating, as I said, they were sort of the elders of the debating universe at university. And I said to them, if that ever falls apart, tell me, because I'll want to pitch something to Mike because I'm good at doing voices. They got their first ABC television show, and they said they were leaving. So I put together this comes back to my point about like just see lots of opportunities and throw a lot of shit at the wall and hope that something sticks. So one of the many pieces of shit that I threw at the wall, I'm skipping over a whole bunch of other things that I tried to do that I didn't get to do, was to record some comedy sketches and impersonations. This is in the, I guess, 2002, did you say? 2003 it would be? Yeah, that's right. And so we're talking about the heady days of the Howard government. So it's John Howard, it's Alexander Downer, I think Kim Beazley is the opposition leader, Philip Ruddock is the Attorney General, and these are all big characters, and I'm good at doing impersonations of all of them. And Mike loved it. He brought me on to do a weekly segment called John Howard's Diary, the private thoughts of a Prime Minister. where I would just ramble for 90 seconds or 2 minutes about the events of the week as the Prime Minister.
And you'd write them yourself
And
as
I would
well.
write it, and voice it. So that was also great training, great on-the-job training in terms of how to write, how to craft a joke. I was sort of self-taught about that, but there is obviously a structure and a beat and a pacing that works and doesn't. And Mike was really good at as a copy editor, because he would edit all my scripts, and I would be endlessly frustrated, as all writers are, when the editor hacks apart your beautiful work and ruins it. But he was always right. Pulling out extraneous words, getting to the punchline quicker, making it a cleaner gag, and I learned to love like satire, basically just making ridiculous points through exaggeration and not telling people what the joke is, but letting it sort of be woven into the fabric of the sketch. And so then Mike got promoted to the breakfast show, and I went for a walk with him on Balmoral Beach in Sydney one day after lunch, because I told him that I needed to have a conversation. And I basically said, I want to go and study improv comedy in New York City. How about this? Instead of me coming in after the breakfast show, when it ends at 9 a.m, and us writing and recording sketches for the following day's show, and thereby being a day behind the news, what if you sponsored me for a US foreign correspondence visa? Speaking of throwing a lot of shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Yeah. And then I would be able to move to New York. And although I wouldn't be allowed to work in the United States, I would be allowed to sign rental leases and get a mobile phone contract and open bank accounts and stay for longer than the 90 days that a tourist can. Yeah. And I would be able to read the newspapers when they came online at midnight Sydney time, which would be daytime, morning in New York. Right. And then by the time you get into the office at 4 a.m, you'd already have a script to look at. I'd record it in my apartment in New York, email the audio files to the technicians in Sydney. They'd whack it together, and you'd have a sketch ready to go after the 7 a.m. news that is based on the news of the day. To his great credit, he agreed to that, and so I went to New York and started doing improv comedy at the Upright Citizens Brigade, where a lot of SNL alums teach and go, and pretty quickly, basically got an agent after having come back to Australia and hosted a companion show to Australian Idol, which was called Idol Backstage, which was the first internet streaming television show that was produced in Australia.
Very early in a lot of media shifts.
Yeah, exactly. And that was just me sort of playing practical jokes on Kyle Sandilands behind the scenes, and interviewing Jessica Mauboy before she goes on stage. It was her season of Idol. And I think that was, although I was wavering about whether I would come back to Sydney to do that, and I only came back for the duration of that shoot, which might have been 8 weeks or something, and I literally slept on the couch of some friends of mine in Glebe. But that turned out to have been a brilliant decision, because once you have a show reel that has the Idol theme music on it, and that is immediately recognizable to Americans, so it made me seem a lot more successful in Australia than I actually was, because I'd just done this companion show. That got me an agent. I got a lot of auditions. Auditioning in New York as a television host is incredibly exciting and intense, because there's so much going on. So I would be going on 3, 4, 5 auditions every single day for different pilots for different shows on the Travel Channel, or on National Geographic, or whatever it might be, or for corporate videos that some company was doing for something or other. And I got a lot of callbacks. I think being Australian helped. I was naturally, I think, good at not having the kind of formulaic, structured, polished American cheesiness, and people liked the sort of honesty and
you have a very distinguished style and charm.
Well, thank you. Obviously it worked, and so then that was when I got a show on Discovery Science Channel. They were launching a show called Brink, which was like smart-arsey weekly look at science news. That was great fun, but in the second season of that, the global financial crisis hit, and it was not a good time to be a small, expensive show on a boutique network that could not go into reruns because it was based on the news. So that got axed after 3 seasons, and that was when I moved to LA, had a terrible, appalling, broke year. I lost money. I'd been hoodwinked into a bad investment with only savings that I had. So I lost all that and, had no prospects and no job and no anything in 2010.
Is it too devastating to give the cliff notes on this investment?
No, it was basically, if anything's too clever for you to fully understand, don't do it.
Red flags.
Yeah. It was an investment in the Japanese, it was a protected investment in the Japanese Nikkei.
Yeah.
And
I'm lost already.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's right.
Okay.
And it basically, the guy who sold it to me said, look, the Japanese stock market's been going gangbusters for over a decade now. It would have to decline by more than 30% for you to lose your money.
But the GFC happens.
And it declines by well more than 30%.
Spion. So you frame it to the former boss, I forget his name right now, when you're walking down the beach.
Yeah, Mike Carlton.
You frame it as, this is actually in your best interests because the show will become much better, even though it is something that you really, really want.
Yes.
So, it's a...
Win-win is a good strategy. If you can make things win-win, absolutely.
It's an expression of, although you're throwing lots and lots of shit at the wall, you're not brazenly throwing it. There is rhyme and reason to how you're throwing it.
Well, in hindsight, when you select the ones that work, it seems like there was rhyme or reason, but I could also give you a lot that didn't work.
That maybe even had more rhyme or reason, and they just still fell
exactly.
flat. Yeah,
Look, I mean, when I say throw shit at the wall, I don't mean
like cavalierly just suggest things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, have some humility about your inability to know what's going to work and what isn't going to work, and so try to do things that other people haven't done or that are going to make you stand out from the pack in some way. And in that particular case, I just knew that I wanted to live in New York City in my 20s. That was just...
Of all the editions, which was the most dreamy, the one you look back on and think, in the alternative universe where I got this job, I wish I'd had it? Which does any of those auditions stand out?
I think I got the best gig ultimately, which was Huffpost Live. I mean,
that came from that too.
I mean, I had to move back from Los Angeles to New York, but yes, it was the same agent and the same circle of people. There were two. I did an audition for a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, which ended up becoming really successful, and also. Was it Dirty Jobs? Or there was a spin-off of Dirty Jobs. Anyway, both of those made their hosts briefly successful. But look, you have to be able to parlay your moment in the spotlight into something more enduring. So I think one way or another, I'm a bit fatalistic about success. Like, I'm not the most successful broadcaster in the world. I'm not even the most successful broadcaster in Australia.
What does that mean, fatalistic?
Meaning that you're going to get there one way or another. Like, there's no...
Right, yeah. There wasn't one path.
Exactly.
And now it's gone.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. I don't think there was anything... Well, actually, that's not true. I got through to the final round of auditions to be a correspondent on The Daily Show when Jon Stewart was still on it. And I got to the level at which he was personally selecting from just a couple of people. So that obviously...
Bastard doesn't like Australians. What's going on there?
I know. So that, yes, you look at moments
incredible.
like
You're
that.
working next to Stephen Colbert and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Wow. Obviously, that would have spun things off in a different direction.
Yeah. Okay, so 35, you get the Huffpost gig. So it sounds like you landed that job through one of these various auditions that you did. It brings you back to New York.
I had moved back to New York in the absence of that. I moved back to New York broke on a dream.
But now have this potentially extremely exciting, burgeoning new media. It was 24/7 streaming, right?
It was 8 hours a day. It was 12 hours a day. It was 8 in New York, and then they would switch over to Los Angeles, thanks to the time difference, and they'd do the final 4 hours in Los Angeles. But I think it was 10 to 10 Eastern. And yeah, I was that was one of those moments where it could have absolutely gone the other way. I think I was the last person cast. There were 6 full-time hosts in New York, and each of us would, host 3 or 4, 2 to 4 half-hour segments every single day.
Yeah.
And it was live interviews with newsmakers and celebrities.
I can only imagine like how exciting it would have been once you have the job.
Yeah.
To have these incredible colleagues, to be working under Arianna Huffington.
There was a lot of money. It was a time in the early 2010s when there was tons of money being poured into tech.
Yeah.
And into...
So this was considered tech?
Yeah, because it was
a blog, right?
So HuffPost at the time was a news blog, but it was the most read online-only news source in the world. And it had billions of eyeballs. And they had really almost single-handedly decimated the American newspaper industry, which managed to clamber its way back over the course of. But I mean, often many of them didn't. Many of them folded. But like the New York Times figured out a way to make itself viable. But at the time, it was
extremely disruptive,
incredibly disruptive. It was a bloodbath in the mainstream media because of outlets like HuffPost. And so when HuffPost turned its eyes to television, there was enormous anxiety amongst the legacy TV channels, and there was enormous optimism and excitement among tech people by going like, wow, if they manage to nail this, then it's going to change television forever.
With the same death throes, which HuffPost caused the traditional magazine and newspaper industry in America, similar to those that we hear now, given the disruption of all the podcasts and all other alternative media that's drawing people's eyeballs away?
It was bigger because it was newer. I think nobody is surprised now by the fact that, you know, our information ecosystem is changing.
Yeah.
But you've got to cast your mind back there when Facebook was a relatively newish thing.
Yeah.
Mobile video was not a thing. People didn't have...
You're reading a broadsheet every day.
Yeah, and people didn't have internet speeds on their phones and enough data on their phones to be habitually consuming video. So the idea of consuming video on a device or streaming, like this was still at the moment when Netflix was shipping out physical DVDs in the mail and that sort of thing. Twitter was not a massive phenomenon yet. It was just on the rise. And obviously there was no TikTok and no Instagram Reels. So I think it was a much bigger.
Yeah, and so are you getting quite a lot of hate from the traditional media saying these guys are bullshit, they don't do real journalism, like that
but I
type
think
of
there
noise?
was also, but we just coded that as jealousy and fear.
There was no truth to it at all?
Not in the case of HuffPost Live. In the narrow case of what I was focusing on, we were doing great work that I'm still proud of.
Some of the people you interviewed, Ian McKellen, Jeremy Irons, Russell Brand before he found Jesus, Michael Moore, Dick Cavett, like I think thousands of people you interviewed in this, 4-year time when you were working with them.
Yes.
Just absolutely incredible.
How many the princess of, you know, some European country that I can't even remember, like, you know, the Prime Minister of Israel, like just incredible breadth. Susan Sarandon, you know, like Rob Reiner, people across entertainment and politics. And so Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's now the in the Trump administration. Yep.
How was it?
I didn't find him to be particularly interesting as an interviewee.
Did he still have his voice?
No, he had his voice wasn't quite as bad as it is now, but it was still, you know, bad enough that it was distracting.
Is it before he came out hectic against autism, or when he was?
No, he was a nutter. He was already a nutter.
Okay.
Yeah, he's always been dodgy. In fact, if I have one enduring criticism of HuffPost in those days, it's that they played a lot of footsie with the bonkers end of the left
because it drives clicks.
I guess so. I think it was also ideological. I think they had
so they were
an institutional sympathy for anti-vax messaging.
So you're doing all these interviews, like you just explained, European princess to RFK to actors, etc. Are you putting in personal research for these interviews, or are you handed a dossier, say 20 minutes before they show up, and you just extemporaneously go for it?
Both, but it's never 20 minutes before they show up. It's always the day. So we'd have a production meeting each morning, or several production meetings throughout the day, and a different team of producers. There were different tiers of producers. So this is probably similar to any big news show, right? Like whether it's 60 Minutes or whatever, you'll have a senior tier of producers, and then you'll have the next tier down, and then a tier below that, and usually you'll have one from each of those groups in the production team that's assigned to any particular story or any particular interview. So I would usually have 3 producers and me, and we would get into a huddle, and we'd have a half-hour meeting about the particular guest who's coming on. Either it would usually be the day before, but if it was a huge celebrity, it might be a week. We might have a week's notice, and they would bring ideas about things that, you know, interesting angles that we might want to explore, and I would yes or no them, and basically work with the senior producer on what things we wanted to make sure that we hit, and if there was anything that we needed to make sure that to avoid, which I usually would not heed anyway, because fuck them. And then you would have a follow-up maybe on the morning to review, but usually I would not have. They weren't writing out questions for me, and I wasn't looking at any questions while I was there. The art really became one of being open and receptive to the person who was sitting in front of me and listening to what they had to say, and honing my own instinct to notice when something had opened up that would be worth pursuing. And the constant decision point in any conversation of what is worth following someone down a rabbit hole for, and what is just going to end up being a dead end. And you can sometimes just notice a twinkle in their eye, or when they shift in their seat, maybe there's something that they don't want to reveal there. Maybe there's something interesting that I can put my finger on if I pursue it. And you've also got the senior producer in your ear, so you're wearing an earpiece. So some hosts like being spoken to while they're doing the interview and told what the next thing to say is. I hate that, and the producers quickly learned that to only talk to me if it was absolutely necessary, if we had to go to something else, or there was breaking news or something. But that's your backup, essentially. If you completely fuck up, they are there.
Do you sort of lament, or rather reminisce on, let me say that again, the collaborative research process to come to an interview? Presumably you're
massively, yeah.
Presumably you're not doing that now.
I miss collaboration a lot. That was one of the things I
imagine
loved.
That would be so much fun because, for instance, Josh Szeps is coming in today. I have an idea for exactly what I want to get from him, but maybe this other person has a different idea, and in between we can meet and find, actually, that's a really interesting line of questioning.
Yeah, that's right.
That'd be incredible.
Yes.
I suppose you can cultivate that with your own personal podcast, obviously, but
I mean, it's never the same,
right?
Because
they have to be full time. And
I am very jealous of people who have, especially in the American context, where you might have 15 writers or something on a show. It's like imagine having Bill Maher's job, where he does a weekly talk show and has a dozen plus writers who all he has to do is think up an idea that might be funny, and an hour later he can have a stack of amazing questions and jokes and insights.
Then it's just down to his own charisma to
That's
deliver
right.
it.
I mean, I am somewhat hopeful that artificial intelligence is quickly flattening that opportunity gap. I mean, I already use ChatGPT a lot as an assistant to bounce ideas off, not obviously to write the final questions that I will just recite, but to throw around ideas about, is there something that I'm missing about this particular guest?
I do too. I interviewed this one with Colin Thubron. If you've heard of him, is one of the great all-time travel writers, contemporaries of Paul Theroux, Bruce Chatwin, etc. And also for you, I was using ChatGPT in a similar manner. This is what I'm thinking about asking him. What do you think about these questions? What's some controversy Josh had in this particular time period? I have found it actually to be quite underwhelming because, and tell me if this is your experience as well, but it tends to just regurgitate the same answers in a slightly different language each time.
It can do.
And therefore, I'm wondering, damn it, is this now driving my direction more than I'm driving its direction? And
I think you just have to be a good editor, though, right? I mean, you have to treat it like a junior assistant rather than a senior producer. It's good at... I just think it's useful to flag for me areas that I might not have thought about or might not have remembered in a person's career. You're right that it hasn't given me it never gives me the top 20% of questions.
No. Or for instance, myself, having listened to so much of your work and then maybe interviewed someone similar to you're going to go and interview, I hope that my human context from knowing more about your style and the indistinguishable parts of what makes you who you are and what you're good at might actually be a much better collaborator.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. But how far away are we from you being able to create, or anyone being able to create, a GPT of their own based on all of my podcasts, right? And
have you explored that?
Yes, I have actually played around with I collected all of the television and radio pitches that I'd ever written in my life and created a GPT around that. I haven't used it yet, but I was starting to throw around some ideas for a new television show that I wanted to pitch.
Okay.
And I said, instead of me writing it from scratch, can you learn from these 32 pitches that I've written in my life? And so I haven't really fully played around with that. But obviously it's going to be pretty soon that you'll be able to take every episode of Uncomfortable Conversations, put it in and go, what would Josh ask the West Australian premiere. And I bet it'll give you I bet it'll be pretty right.
I'm extremely optimistic for that happening as well. In this very moment, it's not there, but I do imagine a future where every book you've ever written, I get the PDF, I put it into a single memory. I take a transcript from every conversation you've ever done, publicly at least, put it into there. All of a sudden, that is brilliant context to some degree. That might solve what you're looking for. But your producers on your show, do you not bounce ideas around them as well? Or at least people in your team?
Well, there is no fixed way of doing my show yet because it's still such a fast-growing beast. So up until, 15 months ago, it was just a hobby, and it was, something that I did on the side because I liked it and because I wanted some kind of insurance policy of maintaining a kind of a platform of fans that was independent of the ABC in case something happened like what ended up happening. So I've actually just brought on a fantastic new producer onto the show. The show has the resources. Thank you to everybody on Substack who pays for bonus content, because that actually doesn't go directly into my pocket. It does get invested into better producers and more resources to make the show better. And I'm finding, people, if you go and look at the YouTube page, for example, or you look at the kinds of clips that we're producing and the kind of trailers that we can produce and the kind of quality that we can put out, that's changed quite a lot this year. And so I see so yes, the short answer is yes, I can bounce ideas off my producer. The only question is, how much revenue am I bringing in order to employ how many people, and is the best use of their time actually to do that, when really that's my strength and my only strength is using my brain to know how to talk to other people. They have all these other actual talents, like, producing the actual show. All I can do and all I actually have to do is be good at one thing.
I think that on the pure sheer production side of things, the gold standard would be someone like Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. The trailer quality is incredible. The amount of guests he gets through, that there is A/B testing on all the questions behind the scenes with a whole team of people. And you end up in this place where he is kind of like the talk show in the UK, and it's an independent podcast, which there's no reason why that's not in your future as well.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to shit on Stephen, but the only thing I would say is there are mechanistic ways of succeeding in the independent media, and then there are authentic ways of succeeding in the independent media. And my selling point is that I'm not going to be relentlessly driven by A/B testing what particular thing, grabs the algorithm more than any other. People are going to listen to me because they think that I'm independent and interesting. Stephen has a different approach, which is everything is relentlessly A/B tested and data driven, and like, what does the internet want me to do? I don't really want to be a puppet of what the internet wants me to do.
It's a
and that will put a ceiling on my popularity, I'm sure.
Yeah.
and that's a price I'm happy to pay.
Totally.
For my credibility.
So, and I'm sure Stephen is fully aware of that as well, and he's 100% happy with going.
That's right.
Did you ever talk to Ariana Huffington about Christopher Hitchens?
No. What was their beef?
No, absolutely no beef at all. They were just.
They were close, were they?
Yeah, they were comrades of sorts.
No, one of my great regrets is never having interviewed Hitch. Like that would have been. He would be one of my top 5 people who were alive during my life who I'd want to talk to.
He died a year before you started hosting Huffpost Live, but undoubtedly he would have been on that roster had he still been alive.
Gutted.
Yeah,
gutted.
To sort of round out at least the Huffpost experience, one day Norm MacDonald arrives on set. How much do you remember about this?
Everything. Norm was a hero of mine. I thought he was one of the funniest. I still think he's probably my favorite comedian. He is just so dry and wry and weird, and like, I don't know why I find him so funny. Just the simplest things. I was just listening back the other day to this thing. He was on a radio show and he was talking about this serial killer, and it's this huge long thing. And this guy, he would rape and mutilate these little girls, and like the hosts are laughing and everything, and it goes on and on explaining all these horrible things in minute detail that this serial killer did. And then at the end he goes, I got one thought about this guy. What a jerk. And that's the whole joke. But I like practically swerved the car off the road as I was listening to it. I was laughing so hard. Just the way that he was. So anyway, long story short, we sort of hit it off on set because I think part of the skills that one of the skills that I have, I think, honed as an interviewer is matching the attitude and the energy level of the guest, just being mindful of that and trying to slip in. If they're giving you nothing, don't try to jump in and make it better. Try to give them a little bit less so that they have to step up and fill the void. And so there's a delicate kind of dance, and I do remember sitting there with him being all normified and me just trying to play. It's a game of tennis. You're just sort of trying to figure out where to place the ball at each of the next shots. And by the end of it, I mean, we were close enough after just half an hour of chatting on the air that he gave me his number, and he and I would then text. And,
no way.
Yeah, we were going to hang out when I was in LA, and then something else came up, but he couldn't. And then before I knew it, he was dead.
Wow. You can really tell in that interview how you do really match his energy. And there was something about Norm that day. He came in extra Norm. You know, like doing everything he could to unsettle you, to pretty much say, I'm not going to follow any line of questioning. We're going to talk about obscure Australian references, which I actually don't have any idea about anyway.
Yeah, I loved it. I love it. I love the unexpected. There's nothing I hate more than the canned and the inauthentic. I like being surprised, and like it's so funny to me that so much of our media seems to be predictable and seems to be people trying to do what they think is supposed to be said. It's something I have to constantly work at, because if someone is coming on the show because they're plugging a book, for example, you do sort of somewhat feel obliged to kind of talk about the book, but actually that's really boring, because there's heaps of other interviews where they talk about the book. Like, let's talk about their mother.
I have this book here. I don't know if you ever read it. It's Norm's autobiography.
I must have. Oh, no, I listened to him. Yes, I listened to him read it, actually, on the audiobook.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he reads the whole thing.
But in the forward there by Louis C.K., he pretty much echoes the sentiment you just gave, which is that, you know, he was, in his opinion, the funniest person who ever lived.
Yeah.
But completely uncopyable. And there isn't any obvious reason why he was funny. Somehow he just was.
Yes.
And it's probably something can't be taught. It's pure style and it's pure personality, just sheer weirdness.
Yep.
That I think Australians especially, but a lot of people around the world just are attracted to. We love this obscurity.
Yeah.
What the hell is this?
Yeah.
I want more of it.
Yeah. And there was a format of his jokes. You know, the serial killer being a jerk reminds me of him also. He had a bit about Hitler where he's talking about how bad Hitler was. And then he says, you know, I'm really starting to have second thoughts about that guy.
Exactly.
It's like, there's no reason why it needs to be hilarious. So much of it is mannerism and, understatedness.
Yeah.
God bless him.
So during Huffpost Live, at one stage in 2014, Joe Rogan discovers you because of a viral clip. So serendipity, in a sense, again. Did you have any sense for just how big that would be at the time?
Yes. Yeah. Joe was so 2014, Joe was probably the biggest independent podcast in the world, but not yet in the stratosphere the way he is today.
A household name.
Yeah, exactly. And not yet getting presidents on. But it was a big deal. And it's funny. You know, when I say that you should just throw a lot of shit at the wall and see what sticks, that can sometimes come off to some people as being glib, as being like, you know, just, you know, give it a shot and then move on. I'm actually not, that's not an ethos of mine, in the sense that I do try to do the very best, sometimes to my peril, because it means that I'm too much of a perfectionist to actually get the thing done at all. Because I've had many opportunities that I've just never bothered to act upon for the same reason as I made that call to my agent about the Olly the Kookaburra audition. Like, do I really need to make this perfect? If I am going to make it perfect, maybe I run out of time to do it before something else comes up. Maybe I am so torn up, trying to make it the best possible version that it could be that I never actually get around to submitting anything because I'm endlessly tweaking it. But in something like, there are two instances in my time at Huffpost where I remember really taking it seriously. One was my first appearance on the Today Show on NBC, where they brought me on with Kathy Lee Gifford and Hoda and Al Roker to talk about some news stories of the week. And I put a lot of effort into making that funny and knowing exactly what I was going to say. And they absolutely loved me. And then I came back and I was a regular on that. And similarly, when I was going on Rogan, it amazes me that some people will be invited on a show like Rogan and then just sort of show up and have no idea. I was still winging it, but I had a lot of, I came armed with a big arsenal of interesting thoughts, ideas, stories that I knew would tickle Joe, and they did, and he loved it, and we hit it off, and I basically had a standing invitation to come on the show anytime I was in Los Angeles, which I did 6 more times over the subsequent 4 years or something. And then he moved to Austin, and I was on again during the pandemic. Last time I was in the States, but since then I've been out here, and he's been there.
Is there any feeling in your gut that because of how it went last time you were on that you are now not invited back?
No idea. It doesn't bother me. I don't think about it. There are lots of reasons why people can't go on the show anymore, like the fact that everyone in the world wants to go on the show, and so he has to be much more selective. I haven't tried hard to go on the show since then, so we'll see. If I had something to... My suspicion is no. My suspicion is that his generosity and goodwill is more valuable and more important to him than having people agree with his opinion. So my sense is that if I had something that was important to me to talk about or to shill, and if the message was actually able to get to him, because I don't know whether or not he still checks the phone that I have the phone number of anymore, or whether everything goes through managers or something now, then he would do it.
Regarding the Today Show appearance in one of your monologue podcasts as well, you did speak about that experience, how you knew you were coming on and you'd be up the night before preparing the most pithy jokes, various avenues you could go down to make sure that you made this incredible impression.
Yes.
And even the first time you were invited on Joe, he said, next time you're in LA, come over. And you're just like, oh yeah, I'll actually be there next week.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And re-diverting the plans.
You are a Szeps completist, I'll grant you that. You've got all of the anecdotes.
But creating the serendipity is the point, I think, there.
Yes.
Even though you've got this incredible position, HuffPost Live, interviewing the best people in the world, the antenna is still up for the big opportunities and the big ways to propel you forward.
Look, it's also just fun.
To do these shows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. It's fun. If it was a hassle, then I wouldn't do it. If it was purely strategic and me being like, you know what, if I go over there and do the Joe Rogan show, or if I do this, then I'm going to be able to wrangle my way into doing something. That would be an exhausting life. I know people who are strategically ambitious like that, and I wouldn't want to live that life. It's super fun to get picked up before dawn in a stretch limousine and being driven to Rockefeller Plaza so that you can get makeup put on you and then tap dance. Yeah. It's super fun to go see where Joe Rogan records his show, and I find it fun. Not everybody does, but I'm never happier than when I'm doing something like that.
And so then in 2017, so just after the end of HuffPost Live, did you leave there or did...
No, I was fine. The whole place basically collapsed.
Blew up. You moved back to Australia, and I couldn't figure out why this was. Is it because you're a newborn now, you're married, and I
was not a newborn, but I had newborns.
you had Benjamin Buttoned your way into the perfect middle ground. And then, yes, so for instance, you're moving back to Australia. It's 2017. You've got 2 kids.
Yep.
You're married to your husband, Sean.
Yep.
There was a profile in the Sydney Morning Herald that touches on this a little bit.
Yeah.
And so Sean, it sounds like, from his words at least, he didn't settle well into Australia initially.
No, it was brutal. It was horrible, not just for him, but for me. That was a bad period after HuffPost. It was another one of those dark night of the soul kind of moments where we moved to Los Angeles. I was drinking a lot. I was like going to a lot of auditions. I was like, I was doing a podcast, but I wasn't really making a lot of money from it. It wasn't crisis point, but it was like just blah point of like, what do I do now kind of thing? How do you make this work exactly? I didn't like being back in Los Angeles. I don't like it I love it as a town to visit, but I don't like it as a town to live in. At the time, there was an opportunity arose to be a fill-in host on ABC Radio Sydney. The evening show had 6 weeks or something without the regular host, and so I came back, found an Airbnb in Bondi. That's right. It was just over the summer. It was the summer break, and I did evenings. And they liked me, and I got noticed by my sort of greatest mentor and champion, Judith Whelan, who used to be the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, which is the biggest broadsheet newspaper in Sydney, and she was now in charge of radio there, and it was her who really concocted the plan for me to be the new star of ABC Radio Sydney. After the current breakfast morning radio team, which is like the main time slot, the most listened to slot, 6 to 9 in the morning, after they left, which was expected to happen within the next few years, and the cupboard was a bit bare in terms of new talent. Everyone there had been there for more than a quarter of a century, and they needed fresh faces, and they liked the fact that I had experience in New York, the biggest broadcasting market in the world, and what I needed from them was like enough money to be able to convince my family to move back to Australia, essentially. And Sean, my husband, was luckily an easy sell because he didn't like seeing me miserable, and he had sort of wanted to move to Australia anyway, just for lifestyle reasons and for the adventure of it. And Judith Whelan, God bless her, to her credit, was able to get me something that ABC doesn't do, which is a sort of a holding deal where you're guaranteed a certain number of weeks on the air while the regular hosts are off, in exchange for normally they would just pay you a casual day rate, but she
got his salary.
Yeah, she got us a proper salary. She got me a once a week panel show on Radio National, and she got me a podcast. So she was able to kind of cobble together streams of income from a bunch of different departments in order to lure me back with a good package. And so that was enough. And then it was it was tricky. It's like psychologists talk about big life events that impose a lot of stress on you as being like triggers for mental health issues or whatever. And one might be moving house, one might be changing jobs, one might be having kids, one might be moving countries. We did it all at once in an instant. We moved with 2-month-old twins.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was brutal, but it all came good, and we survived, and the rest was history.
In the brutality of it, because for Sean, there's this romantic idea of what Sydney is and what Australian life is, but at the end of the day, you're still the same person. You're just moving to a different place, but now it's with no friends. It's maybe with insecure work opportunities, and it's with all this extra responsibility. Was there a point where you just thought, look, we're going to retreat back to the US because at least I'm more of a name there. I also have a network there, and you're from there. Was this part of the...
No.
Never?
No, because I knew that the problem was one of transition, right? And I knew that another transition
Very steadfast of you.
Yeah, well, I just have a feeling that like people... We can all acclimatize to anything, but transitions are very stressful. And so I just coded I really thought that we just hated being parents, because it really sucks having little kids when you don't have enough support to look after them, and when you're already stressed and driven up the wall. I now love having kids, but I like kids, not babies, like little mewling lizard.
Like a personality started
exactly,
to show.
Exactly. I want them to be able to ask me a stupid question, not just scream at me. So, no, I didn't. We were here. That was it. And I felt like if in 5 years we want to pack it in and move back, that's great. Totally. But don't make life-changing decisions in the throes of a crisis.
Yeah. It's pretty comforting to hear you say that. I'm only been back here 3 months after living away for so long.
Yeah.
And really have felt this, like waking up in the morning and just thinking, we're packing it in. We're going back.
Why is that?
Because, well, it's it's a lot. It's maybe I'll cut this out, but if you really want to know, I can explain.
Yeah, I do, but don't cut it out. I'm sure the audience wants to know as well. I listen to the show.
I don't know. But
look, give it 12 months or 18 months.
That's
and
where
then
we've landed.
Once the crisis is over, then make a cool-headed decision, because you're not wrong. Yeah. Like there's definitely a career path that is much more fruitful for both of us, not in Australia.
Right. Well, I'm happy
that's a trade-off.
I'm happy you said that.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm sorry, Josh, but I probably will cut that out.
Yeah, that's fine.
But that point will come up again, so hold on to it. Where did we go? I asked if it was comforting. So we can move.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So this ABC job is proceeds one step after another until the debacle, which doesn't need to be covered here. I think it was covered really well on Chris Williamson's Modern Wizards episode. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But in short, you didn't toe the party line, and we're taking our back. There's a TV show you made reference to in your podcast titled Resilience. Was this what you were echoing a little bit earlier? You were pitching a TV show and it sort of fell through, so this is quite devastating?
No, that was something else. That was something different. I don't want to throw the person under the bus, but the very high-profile Australian and I were collaborating on a project, and then at the very last minute, it wasn't gonna happen. But that's,
justifiable reasons?
What's that?
Justifiable reasons.
Look, if people don't want to do things, then by definition it's justifiable.
Fair enough.
Only do what you want to do. No one's obliged to give me the time of day if they don't want to.
Was it tied into the ABC drama?
No, not really. No.
Okay.
But it was just the reality of life in the entertainment industry and in independent media, which people outside it don't necessarily know, is that most of it is just about managing failure.
Okay. Go on. What does that mean?
Well, most of it, anyone who is successful, who is not just a flash in the pan, who has enduring success, their career is defined behind the scenes, mostly by things that they wanted to get up that didn't get up, things they wanted to do that they couldn't do, jobs that they went for and didn't get. I mean, the vast, vast, vast majority of people's careers, even at the very, very top. Obviously not once you're at the top, like Tom Cruise doesn't have that problem anymore, but Tom Cruise did have a period where, and probably I'm sure still does, have projects that he really wants to do that for one reason or another, they're not going to come together. The studio pulls the plug at the last minute. There were backers who, he wants to do something with another star, and that star then goes off and does another movie. Right. Managing your reaction to things not going the way that you wanted them to is really the hallmark of successful people, not how they deal with success. Success is easy to deal with. When things go your way, everyone can deal with that.
Yeah. So, as if you weren't steeped in enough drama, this is post-ABC collapse, or rather debacle.
Yeah.
The Josh Szeps Substack and Uncomfortable Conversations is now paying a living. So absolutely incredible. And from all reports, it's just grown and grown and compounded ever since.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about it didn't take very long. Like, I didn't have to spend a very long time grieving my ABC paycheck because they so stuffed up how they got rid of me, and then they booted me out a week before I was due to even leave, so I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to my audience because I didn't get technical approval to do an appearance on a show, which presenters don't usually
total bungle
get
from
anyway. Them. So at the time they were running around like a bunch of headless chooks. This was literally the same week that they also put their foot in it with Antoinette Lattouf, who was a presenter for 5 days, and they fired her 2 days early, and she's now taken them to court over that. So the fact that they bungled it was advantageous to me in the sense that a lot of people were like, "Oh, who is this Josh guy?" Or like, "How else do we find him?" And so my subscribers,
so you really grew an audience there too.
Yeah, my subscribers doubled the month after my departure was announced, and then doubled again the month after that, and that was enough to replace my ABC salary.
And in the year since, have we seen another doubling?
That's a good question. I don't. I make sure that I don't relentlessly follow the data. Right. I outsource that to my producer. I want to grow by 5% a month, which is 5xing it in 3 years. And beyond that, I don't pay any attention.
But you were bringing us up to this moment as if you weren't steeped in enough drama. You speak very carefully and sympathetically about Alan Jones, your former boss, who made repeated sexual advances on you. And despite the history between the two of you, would you have him on Uncomfortable Conversations?
Yes.
Have you reached out and asked?
No.
Why not?
There's no way in hell his lawyers would let him speak to the media.
Okay. Out of fear of saying too much.
I mean, when you've been charged with, crimes, you don't talk to the press.
Yeah. And we don't have to relitigate it here, but you did an excellent monologue episode talking about that, which truly I thought was like very sincere and measured.
Thank you. That was about the hardest. Yeah, I mean, that was probably the most difficult editorial I've ever had to do. People should listen to it if they are at all interested in Australian media and Alan Jones, or even just in people like Kevin Spacey and, or the whole Me Too.
It's much bigger than Australian media.
The whole question of Me Too, I suppose. I was actually in New York when I recorded that because the news broke while I was in the States, and it took many, many different versions of recording that before I nailed, I think, what ended up being the correct tone that I was proud of.
Mm-hmm. And you did in one take as well, I believe. Yeah, didn't sound cut at all.
Yeah.
Your mates are the who's who of podcasting. So in conversations off camera, how do they make sense of their enormous influence? And then do you think that, given the scope of what you want to do, being in Australia is a limitation?
Depends who you're talking about. It's impossible to sort of generalize about how podcasters think about podcasting. Some people just think it's, they're blessed and it's a random gift that has dropped from the heavens, and others think it's a natural.
It seems like it might be for a lot of
place for them. Yeah, that's right. Australia absolutely imposes limits on, imposes a ceiling on my success. That's a trade-off that I'm making at the moment for my kids and my family and my personal lifestyle.
Can you express what that trade-off is?
Yeah, Sydney is a great place to live. The climate's great. The beaches are great. The parks are great. You don't have to worry about about health insurance the way that you do in the United States. You don't have to worry about gun violence the way that you do in the United States. You don't have to worry about what primary school your kid goes to get into the right prep school, to get into the right college that they're not going to be able to afford the way that you do in the United States. You don't have to put up with the weather in England. It's a good place to live. Things work here. It's relatively stress-free. I think we've struck a pretty good balance between Scandinavian-style socialism on the one hand and unfettered dysfunctional capitalism of America on the other. There are very few countries that if you ask the random informed global citizen, where would you want to live? Then Australia is always near the top of the list. That's the upside. The downside is it's a medium-sized country that's a long way away from everywhere else. And so in terms of doing sit-down interviews, and there's really no substitute for a sit-down face-to-face interview, I either have to travel a lot around the world a couple of times a year, and then it's never quite right to fit everybody's schedules together. And I think there's a big opportunity cost for me in terms of the network effects of this industry. I mean, I was on Chris Williamson's show in Austin, and he was like, the night after tomorrow I'm getting together with Scott Galloway and I can't remember who the other people were, but you should come along to dinner. I was like, I have to leave, I've got to fly to London, I've got to get back home to my kids. It's impossible to know whether or not there's any subsequent utility in befriending those people. Or being in a milieu where those kinds of dinners happen. But there's a reason why every single AI company exists within a 50-mile radius in San Francisco. There's a certain synchronicity that comes about, a certain melting pot. And Australia just doesn't have that on a global scale. We've got a localized version of it. And so I am in a moment of some sort of, I guess, a crisis of conscience of sorts about how much am I willing to put up with that trade-off? What are the most parsimonious ways to deal with that trade-off? What technology is available to maybe mitigate it? How much travel can I do? What is the best way for me to become a member of that global podcast elite whilst being its Australian representative based here, rather than being a big podcaster in Australia, if that is a difference that makes sense.
No, that former sounds like a pretty good position.
Yeah.
Almost sounds like the one you're in, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, I'm aiming things towards that, and but that that constantly there's constant decisions to make. For example, about like how much would you cover an Australian election?
Totally.
Right now, we're about to have an election.
Like how niche do you take it at the threat of silencing your American audience?
Yeah, exactly. So my current strategy is do stuff that is relevant to Australia, that burnish my bona fides here, at the same time as making sure that the content is always interesting to people who aren't interested in Australia. And that's a challenge.
I want to share this Substack anecdote with you from a former guest on this show, one of the biggest Substacks in the world. That's terrible exaggeration, one of the biggest political substacks in America. And he shared this fascinating anecdote, which I think tells a story. The business model of subscriptions to your Substack doesn't solve the audience capture siloed issues that paying for a newspaper or advertisers, or a business model where newspapers got advertising revenue to produce their journalism. So that was totally bungled. But I understand what you're saying, yeah. So for instance, he has thousands of paid subscribers, and then every time he publishes anything that is pretty anti-Trump, he'll get a few more, and a lot of people will read it. And then occasionally he'll publish something which has nothing to do with politics, and pretty much no one reads it. And then occasionally he'll post something which is like, this wasn't too bad, actually. And then he'll lose subscribers, which means it's this compounding movement towards audience capture. I should be saying this because my revenue is directly taken on the other side of it, which for you must be kind of unsettling because that is your source of revenue. And
maybe I'm too Pollyanna about it, but I think that it depends on what your audience is capturing you to do, right? And my strong suit, what people say they like about my show, is they like hearing a sane, articulate, light-hearted person playfully push back against any idea, really. And they like, even if they disagree with me, they want me to be fair-minded. They like, if they disagree with me, they like hearing someone articulate the opposing point of view in a way that seems maximally generous to their own side instead of straw-manning it. They like the intellectual rumble. They like the attitude. They like the rambunctiousness. They like the kind of fearlessness and the fact that I'm willing to talk about things and say things that would otherwise get people cancelled, but not in a way that sounds like I'm being needlessly provocative, a way that sounds like I'm trying to understand the actual underlying point. And I think that mosaic of that playground that I'm operating in, that playing field, perhaps I should say, is really politically agnostic, actually.
Okay.
And so I'm hoping that the audience capture is only a capture towards making more sense.
Are you concerned that there's a low ceiling on that?
In what sense?
That the people generally willing to pay for that type of media has a relatively low ceiling.
No, I don't.
What would audience capture look like if you were to really lean into it?
I mean, I think the audience capture contains the seeds of its own downfall. I think it's a poison pill because the obvious way that I could get captured by my audience would be to do heaps of anti-woke stuff, right? And to be really, anti-trans and like the left is crazy and the left is killing us all. There's a big appetite for that kind of thing in Podcastistan. There's a lot of people making a lot of money by, talking about how silly universities are and how, there's too much focus on identitarianism and stuff. And I occasionally cover that. I mean, my instinct is not to be divisive, but I think that then you just become a caricature of yourself, and then you just become a screeching, pontificator that people don't take seriously. I would rather... Yeah, look...
I'm not suggesting you would do it, but I just wonder what it would look like.
There is some ceiling on people who want to make sense, but it's a very high ceiling, I think. I mean, it's probably 30% of the population or something, which is a lot more than listen to my show currently.
That's
so
amazing.
There's still a lot of upside. Yeah, that's my intuition.
I do agree with you, but I just feel like maybe that route is less explored and therefore much harder to truly make sense of. But if you lead into the anti-woke stuff, I'm not suggesting this is what you would do, but I'm just wondering what it would look like. There could be there's a Piers Morgan in Australia that exists right now and hasn't made it yet, but can tap into that big time. You know.
Yeah, but Piers Morgan of 2025 is not Piers Morgan. Like, Piers Morgan needed 2015 to 2022 to happen in order for Piers Morgan to become Piers Morgan.
The Today Show, you mean?
No. Sorry. The Piers Morgan needed the left to go crazy during the period after Obama in order to have the red meat to make him who he is. If he was starting out today with the shtick that he has, I don't think that he'd be very successful because it's too irrelevant. Who gives a shit about so much of the things that the anti-woke right bang on about at the moment?
Apparently a lot. His channel is huge. His channel is huge. And he's an amazing driver of rage.
Yes.
It's impressive to see from the outside. But that's because
people have calcified pain from the stupidness of where social justice, ideologues took us over the past decade.
So I'm conscious of the time.
Well, before we get to the very end of where I currently am, we should also just talk about, and maybe you're going to go there, about what the show can become, or what I think the landscape of independent media for a show like mine can be.
Would love to hear it.
So when I left the ABC, I had a sense of like, yes, let's continue doing the podcast and try to make the podcast viable. And I changed it from one show a week to 2 shows a week. And let's semi-paywall one of those shows and put it behind a Substack so that if people pay me $5.99 a month, they can get an ad-free version and they can get 2 episodes a week instead of 1.5. That's all well and good. But then I also started thinking, how do you take some of the stuff that we were trying to do on Huffpost Live in New York a decade ago and bring it in as well? Like, it genuinely surprises me. If you'd gone back to me at the early days of Huffpost Live and said, you're going to be sitting in 2025, so 13 years later, that's as far away as 2038. Imagine you say, okay, in 2038, and nobody will yet have nailed a format that combines the professionalism of traditional legacy broadcasting with the sense of rambunctiousness and unpredictability and chaos and aliveness of a Reddit thread or of Twitter or something like that. Like, it's really interesting to me that no one has quite done that. There is no show that I can think of, either in the legacy media or on YouTube, that truly feels like a really interesting, creative, innovative hybrid of the best of both, of the best of the web and new media on the one hand.
What's your explanation for that?
Probably cowardice and confusion from old network executives, combined with a lack of resources in the new media. And probably a lack of innovation and a lack of ability to do it. So I'd like to be the person who does that.
Right.
And so part of the new thinking about Uncomfortable Conversations is we've just launched a weekly streaming Substack video show called Szeps Live, which is just me shooting the breeze with other Substackers or interesting people at 9 p.m. Eastern US time on Tuesdays. And so that'll be an additional piece of content that doesn't show up in the podcast feed, but will be a place for me to start playing around with live streaming video. And we've got some other things planned on that in terms of like going overseas and doing, I won't spill the beans now, but like there are all kinds of things that I would like to do in terms of stitching together, not just a podcast, but attempting to leverage the opportunities of Substack, live video, interactivity with the audience, like live participation, that sense of kind of sparkling spontaneity that we started getting in HuffPost that has now sort of devolved into just a lot of boring Instagram reels and TikToks from, self-important people who are commenting too much about things that they don't really know about. Like I want to get, so that I think is like the next chapter that I'm excited about. And I think it's incredible. The right time, technologically and in terms of viewing habits and
so what do you need?
Habits.
You need some type of investment and then a couple of good hires that's talent.
I probably need to figure out what it is first. Yeah, I probably need to figure out what it is. And so you just start doing that by playing around. And if you're going to do it independently in the new media, then you'd probably need some investment. But the alternative is that you go to the legacy media and they do it. And so, if
there it is again. You have a longing for traditional broadcasting.
Yes,
really.
because there's an established, there's a lot of institutional wisdom in the legacy media. I am not a person who's like, the elites have just betrayed us and, there's no utility in it. There's a lot of fucking wisdom at the ABC and at SBS and at Channel 9. And, if you could tap that but also bring the spirit of the new media. I mean, imagine a show that was on Channel 9 at the same time as it was streaming on YouTube, and also you could participate and people could join from home and I don't know exactly what that is. And at the moment, it's possible that network executives would leech all of the life out of it by overproducing it, right? But at some point, someone's going to do it.
Instinctually, I feel like there's definitely an appetite for that.
Yeah.
And you're very well positioned to be the person that creates that.
All right, let's put in the call.
That's incredible. Finally, a quote from you, mate. If John Howard wasn't in power, it's entirely possible my life would have gone in a completely different direction. The sort of thematic of serendipity throughout. But it's impossible to know. But what would have happened had you never done the voice acting and never sort of gone down this route and taken the media and communication seriously at university?
To be honest, probably nothing amazingly different, and maybe it would have been a quicker path to... Yeah, maybe it would have been a quicker path. The only radically different thing I could imagine would be if I'd gone into law, which is another possibility, or diplomacy would have been the other things. I could have imagined being an ambassador, or I could have imagined being a lawyer. But it's funny, when you're young, you do have a tendency to associate particularly glamorous professions with the most successful people in those professions, and more mainstream professions with the median person in that profession. So I didn't want to be like a solicitor who was just drawing up conveyancing plans for someone's, house sale or something. So I was like, I don't want to be a lawyer. But I didn't think about arguing in front of the United Nations or the International Criminal Court, or arguing before the Supreme Court.
Yeah. That's such a funny observation. It's so true.
Yeah. And I thought about going into the diplomatic corps and just being a functionary in Canberra. I didn't think about being Australia's ambassador to Washington. But I did think about being Dave Letterman or Jon Stewart. So that's the path that I chose.
Josh, mate, can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time coming over here.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Cheers,
Thanks.
Mate.